Good evening and welcome to the Marion Minor Cook Athenaeum. My name is Hamsa Shrikant and I'm one of the two Ath Fellows this year. Doorbell, sponge cake, dinner party. Do these words sound familiar? Well, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, Jane Austen is the first recorded author of 40 words, including the 3 that I just mentioned right now. The famous novelist lives on today, both through her work and through the communities that have been created around it. Our speaker tonight, Ted Scheinman, will talk about his indoctrination into this enthusiastic world when he organized UNC Chapel Hill's first ever Jane Austen summer camp. Scheinman combines stealth journalism, frank memoir, academic savvy, and scandalous dance partners all in one delightful book, which, by the way, is available for sale at the lobby. Tonight, Scheinman will discuss the prevalence of literature cliques, literature cults, and how they're formed, and how they can be surprising forces for good. He will also address best practices for reporting fairly and rigorously on subcultures. Ted Scheinman is a senior editor at Pacific Standard magazine, where he directs special projects and climate coverage. Among other duties, he reported from the United Nations climate summits in Paris and Marrakesh in 2015 and 2016. Scheinman is a graduate of Yale University with a Master's of Arts in English from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He is the author of Camp Austen, My Life as an Accidental Jane Austen Superfan, which was released in 2018, and his essays have appeared in The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Oxford American, Slate, and elsewhere. He is also a contributing editor at the Los Angeles Review of Books. Scheinman's Athenaeum talk is co-sponsored by the Center for Writing and Public Discourse at CMC. And now, to quote Jane Austen, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that audiovisual recording at the Athenaeum is strictly prohibited." This is a space for social exchange, and the use of cell phone greatly diminishes the experience for others. Please use this opportunity to put away your devices and adjust your seat if you have not already done so. And without further delay, please join me in welcoming Ted Scheinman.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'd like to thank the Marion Minor Cook Athenaeum and Claremont McKenna University for having me. I'd also like to thank Hamsa for the very, very kind introduction. No, I'm not using that, so I don't need to slouch. Okay. So I'm here to talk with you a bit about how literary fandom brings people together, how a fervent love for the same books has proved an enduring kind of social glue in strange and surprising ways. This is one of the themes of my book, which is called Camp Austen, My Life as an Accidental Jane Austen Superfan. And the weirdest part of this book is that it's nonfiction. Yes, so books and communities that they are able to conjure or create is our topic today. And before I get to the times that I reported a magazine story while wearing tights, I think it is best to begin back when novels were great and when all the kings were named George. I'm talking about the 18th century. Now, you have to imagine that you live in an age when you and all your friends fervently await the publication of the latest, most hotly anticipated 3-volume novel. That's hard for most of us to picture, including, I think, for many of the professors. At the same time, most analogies are pretty condescending to students, so I will use one, and I apologize in advance for condescending to you. Imagine if people got as hype about the upcoming release of a novel as they do about the newest, sleekest smartphone. And now imagine if they did that multiple times a year, and that all their friends did too. People binge these novels the way that you and I binge shows. And since these novels could circulate through community libraries, they actually became something of a new way for young women to socialize, a chance to discuss moral, intellectual, social, and romantic matters away from the church or from their father's fireside. Thereby, these women could forge literary circles with each other. The popular novels of the 18th century could also be tremendous commercial forces. And for both of these reasons, the more alarmist critics of the day feared the popularity of novels with the same alarm as the people who advocate that we ban violent video games. There's one particular moral panic that I have in mind right now, over a novel called The Sorrows of Young Werther by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, published in Europe in 1774. As you might guess from the title, The Sorrows of Young Werther, this book is pretty emo. It offers a high sentimental depiction of a sensitive young man who travels around Europe. Werther eventually grows despondent when he cannot be with the woman he loves, and the character finally commits a flamboyant suicide by pistol. The novel, I should say, really, became a viral hit throughout Europe. Young men imitated the protagonist's garb. Apparently they wore custard yellow trousers and bright blue jackets. Older people, for whatever reason, did not approve. Young men traveled to Rome so that they could imitate Werther's raptures upon seeing the ancient city for the first time. Many fans also imitated his lover's malaise. Just picture lots of young, weirdly dressed emo dudes swooning all over the place. Before long, the novel was banned in various cities, not because of the weird outfits among the fans, but because there was a rumor going around that lots of young men dressing and pining in imitation of Werther had made a vogue of imitating their protagonist's suicide as well. Remember, this is a rumor. It was taking place at a time when cultural scholars distrusted the mania created by the novel, and they denounced the book as a dangerous, corrupting influence. Leipzig banned Werther in 1775 to slow what local authorities alleged was a rash of copycat suicides. The city didn't lift the ban until 1825. That's a really, really durable literary ban. There were subsequent proscriptions in Denmark and Italy. Hamburg's Protestant pastor, Johann Goethe, no relation, a Protestant pastor in Hamburg, called Werther a heinous book and wrote in a call to ban the book for the sake of public morality, quote, "Consider, for God's sake, how many of our youth could end in circumstances similar to those of Werther." The Gentleman's Magazine in England and the Weekly Magazine in America, based in Philadelphia, both declared Werther to be vile, and they encouraged booksellers to remove it from their bookshelves. I'm fairly sure we shouldn't trust all these reports from the period press. More recent scholars have referred to the Werther affair as an early media panic, and I think on this they're absolutely right. If Lord Byron, the poet and traveler, would later be called mad, bad, and dangerous to know, Werther was considered mad, bad, and dangerous to read. The alleged rash of suicides that cropped up in lurid news reports from Boston to London to Leipzig are believed, again, by various modern-day scholars to have been grossly exaggerated and in many instances invented out of whole cloth. In the same way that baby boomers once looked at skateboarders and saw only Satanists, the elders of Leipzig looked out at all these young men in cream yellow breeches and gaudy blue coats, and despaired for the youth. Now, this was all happening during something of an explosion of fiction and an accompanying backlash against people who were thought to like novels too much. Censorious critics often distrusted a passion for books that could leave the books behind, a passion that could take root in costume and inspire misbehavior while supplying commercial energy to opportunistic marketers. In several European cities, there were Werther-themed cups and plates you could buy, and one enterprising parfumier, a person who makes sense, released a scent that traded on the Werther brand. It was called, what do you think? Eau de Werther, which makes you think of a perfume that smells like Werther's Originals or something. In Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, the actual novel, even the monster has a copy of The Sorrows of Young Werther. He finds it in that little leather satchel. I don't know, it's a little satchel, but he finds it in that leather satchel, along with copies of Milton and Plutarch. When Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein in 1815, there were translations available in many European languages, despite the many bans against the book. Mary was 18 when she wrote the first draft. Like most young readers of the right class and means, she would not let a municipal bureaucracy or ban stand in her way. So I was reminded of all these things, the mania for Werther and the accompanying backlash, earlier this year, in one particularly vivid moment. This is when fans of the animated sitcom Rick and Morty assailed McDonald's locations coast to coast, hoping to get just a taste of a limited time offer on Szechuan sauce, a condiment that is mentioned in the show. At the time of this first kerfuffle, I heard a bunch of Gen Xers, and probably some boomers as well, complaining about how millennials had become a hopeless mob. My first thought was, a lot of those people are actually too young to be millennials. Get your terminology right. My second thought was, this is what every generation thinks about the enthusiasms of the next. Writers of the Elizabethan era had famously pursued an argument over whether it was morally acceptable to portray vice on stage, or whether merely seeing vice would inspire identification in the audience, or worse, imitation. The novel craze of the late 18th century, and especially the craze for so-called novels of sensibility, including The Sorrows of Young Werther, seemed to bring these critics' worst fears to life. Here we had fiction that operated the same way social life operated, through conversation, through letters, and which a young woman, say, who wished to carry on an illicit affair through the postal service, could then emulate. A love of novels, like a love of gory theater 2 centuries earlier, had become socially and morally suspect. In the very last decade of the 18th century, a young woman in the south of England was writing about these very concerns in an early draft of the novel that would become Northanger Abbey. This is a somewhat long, but I hope very fun paragraph from chapter 5. The progress of friendship between Catherine and Isabella was quick as its beginning had been warm. They called each other by their Christian names, were always arm in arm when they walked, and if a rainy morning deprived them of other enjoyments, they were still resolute in meeting in defiance of wet and dirt, and shut themselves up to read novels together. Yes, novels. For I will not adopt that ungenerous and impolitic custom so common with novel writers of degrading by their contemptuous censure the very performances to the number of which they are themselves adding, joining with their greatest enemies in bestowing the harshest epithets on such works, and scarcely ever permitting them to be read by their own heroine, who, if she accidentally take up a novel, is sure to turn over its insipid pages with disgust. Alas, if the heroine of one novel be not patronized by the heroine of another, from whom can she expect protection and regard? That is such a good line. I cannot approve of it. Let us not desert one another. We are an injured body. Although our productions have offered more extensive and unaffected pleasure than those of any other literary corporation in the world, no species of composition has been so much decried. From pride, ignorance, or fashion, our foes are almost as many as our readers. There seems almost a general wish of decrying the capacity and undervaluing the labor of the novelist, and of slighting the performances which have only genius, wit, and taste to recommend them. Only genius, wit, and taste. Just 2 more lines. Such is the common cant. And what are you reading, miss? Oh, it is only a novel, replies the young lady, while she lays down her book with affected indifference or momentary shame. It is only Cecilia or Camilla or Belinda, or, in short, only some work in which the greatest powers of mind are displayed, in which the most thorough knowledge of human nature, the happiest delineation of its varieties, the liveliest effusions of wit and humor are conveyed to the world in the best chosen language. She was good, right? She was really good. So this is a wonderful passage, and you could spend years talking about it. I want to just narrow right down and say that the dilemma here, facing heroines in novels, facing the writers of novels, facing the readers of novels, the dilemma here is twofold. With so many naysayers about fiction, what is a novelist to do? For that matter, what is a novel reader to do? This passage from Austen raises the questions and then gives us a clue as to their solution, and that solution has to do with fellowship. Note the first person plural. Let us not desert one another. We are an injured body. Also note the calls to solidarity. Quote, alas, if the heroine of one novel be not patronized by the heroine of another, from whom can she expect protection and regard? So yes, the answer is from other people who recognize that novels are not immoral contrivances, but rather, as Austen's narrator writes, a product of the greatest powers of the mind and a thorough knowledge of human nature. Novels bring wit and pleasure, yes. She is insistent on this point, and rightly so. But they are also born of wisdom, and they have an almost mystical power to create community. Werther fever was on my mind often as I reported my book on the Jane Austen mania. By Austen mania, I mean the mental or spiritual state of being, the mental or spiritual state of being passionately devoted to the novels, stories, and letters of Jane Austen, and also to the material history of her age. When she died 201 years ago in 1817, Jane Austen was not by any means a viral hit of the day, though the Prince Regent was a fan, and Sir Walter Scott had written something like a glowing review of Emma. 200 years later, circumstances for Austen are quite different. No longer a spinster in a backwater, which is the view of so many readers, and it's a quote from E.M. Forster. I'm not calling her a spinster. No longer a spinster in a backwater, but a bulletproof global brand celebrated in countless film adaptations, action figures, and novelty books, not to mention YouTube series and satirical Twitter accounts. Austen has been successfully packaged and remixed in so many ways that she becomes both infinitely approachable and ever receding. The holes and ellipses in her biography present opportunities for the imagination and then frustration whenever the real Jane inevitably slips through our grasp. If there is any group with privileged access to the real thing, the people who come in closest contact with Austen, as Werther maniacs sought to do with Goethe, it's the secret society of Jane Austen superfans known as Janeites. Janeites spend anywhere between 1 and a dozen weekends each year hanging out with one another and discussing Austen's life and work with a passionate fealty. That might all sound dry and dreary, except that these odd and lovely people can often be seen walking around wearing the clothing of Austen's own day. For gentlemen, that means breeches, a waistcoat, but you pronounce it waistcoat, a frilly collar, and a topcoat, while for women, an empire waist gown, or on an especially racy day, an anachronistic corset can serve as the costume. And this is how you come to find yourself strolling across an idyllic university campus in the middle of summer, suddenly approached by smiling, beaming individuals dressed like Lizzie Bennet and Mr. Bingley. It's also how eventually you get talked into dressing up and playing Mr. Darcy at the ball. Like hobbyists in any field, Austen maniacs, or I might as well just call them Janeites at this point, develop a mastery of arcane knowledge, including the finer points of Regency marriage law and, in some cases, an expertise in the agricultural practices of the period. Fitting, since Jane's father, besides being a clergyman, also oversaw a working farm, and as a child, Jane would often rehearse plays with her siblings that they eventually staged in the barn. During my last year and a half in graduate school, I spent a fair bit of time reporting about this group of people. They are as eclectic as they are eccentric. There's some Republicans, some Democrats, some men, more women, lots of white people, but also a fair number of scholars and fans from the Middle East and South Asia, all of whom delight in rereading and dissecting the novels of Jane Austen, and who gamely put on the corset or the breeches as the urge strikes them. I should note here in passing that there is a lot of cross-dressing in the world of the Janeites. Which is in some ways a matter of mathematical necessity because there aren't enough men to be on the dance floor. So Werther mania kept flitting in my mind during that period, in part because, like the censors of Leipzig, I was at first not entirely comfortable around people who dressed so strangely. But mainly I thought about Werther because it seemed to me that whenever any group of people loves something more than another group of people thinks they should, the first group gets labeled mad. You'll notice I have repeatedly used the noun mania. But of course, these people weren't mad any more than those fans of Rick and Morty, so I decided to find out what had gotten them so worked up. Are cliques of this sort, broadly speaking, good or bad? Does a self-congratulatory circle of like minds breed healthy, wholesome community? Or does it inevitably mean a dangerous excess of enthusiasms, followed by discord, a retrenchment into tribes? And within each little commonwealth, will petty differences eventually consume any small self-governing community? Or does belonging to one clique help us learn the skills to thrive in and help improve our macro communities? These might sound like very abstract questions, but they're exactly the questions driving the work that made me most excited about becoming a journalist. Whether it was Ellen Willis in Jerusalem or Tom Wolfe tooling around with the merry pranksters for the electric Kool-Aid acid test, or even Hunter S. Thompson riding along with the Hells Angels. The long-reported works that got me most jazzed to go out into the field were all about figuring out a subculture or underseen community, infiltrating it, even stealing its secrets, in some measure. That always struck me as a worthy style of journalism, the soft anthropology of the attentive reporter, and I was especially drawn to the whiff of espionage that came along with it. Tom Wolfe uses his hideous East Coast suits as a sort of plainclothes disguise and diversionary tactic against the merry pranksters, and Hunter S. Thompson was at risk for his life at several points in his reporting among the motorcycle gangs. Telling the story of a subculture in a way that hasn't been done before is like coming back from an uncharted land with a rudimentary map, or returning to chronicle a war the mere outlines of which other people haven't the faintest ideas of. I should say Hunter S. Thompson was actually sort of like kicked in the ribs and stomped on by the Hells Angels. The Janeites never did anything like that to me. As an editor, these are also some of my favorite pieces to assign. Having a writer in bed with migrants in Eastern Europe, or with burners at the Israeli version of Burning Man. When you send the right writer on an assignment of this sort, you end up with powerful work that illuminates not just the dynamics of a single unique group, but also of our larger culture, and certainly of our politics. Writing about subcultures is a work of translation and cultural interpretation, but it's also a metaphor for how each of us individually interprets the world from childhood. Learning the codes and gestures and verbal tics and unwritten customs that, while uncodified, nevertheless keep conversation moving, commerce flowing, and help dictate the general trends toward happiness or unhappiness, thriving or failing, war or peace. At one time or another, we have each played this role of social surveyor in friendly and unfriendly territory alike. We are each, for good and ill, embedded in concentric circles of community, and whether or not we like them, we must still work to understand them. I'd like to talk briefly about the ethics of the whole thing. And I maintain that these ethics hold whether you're reporting in a very high-stakes way, say among refugees or in any community that is similarly exposed to misrepresentation and active violence, or whether you're reporting in a comparatively low-stakes way, say among middle-class Americans who like to spend their free time dressing up like members of the English gentry from the Regency period. Now, one of these two areas of reporting might well be more important, difficult, and impressive than the other. It's the first one. The first one's the more impressive one. Still, however high or low the stakes, whenever you're reporting within a community that you don't belong to, there are a handful of straightforward things I think you should always remember. 1, these people deserve your respect. 2, these people deserve your accurate, factual representation. These people deserve to know where and how they'll be represented and should be given the option to remove names or other identifying details. Their requests for anonymity are valid, even if their explanations to you are partial or don't even sound all that dramatic. These people are people, not punchlines. And finally, these people know things that you do not, and if you're patient and humble, they will teach you. There's a famous line from Janet Malcolm that most journalists of conscience carry around with them as they go about reporting. It's the opening paragraph from her 1990 book, The Journalist and the Murderer. I'll quote it here. Every journalist who is not too stupid or full of himself to notice what is going on knows that what he does is morally indefensible. He is a kind of confidence man, preying on people's vanity, ignorance, or loneliness, gaining their trust and betraying them without remorse. Like the credulous widow who wakes up one day to find the charming young man and all her savings gone, so the consenting subject of a piece of nonfiction learns, when the article or book appears, his hard lesson. Journalists justify their treachery in various ways according to their temperaments. The more pompous talk about freedom of speech and the public's right to know. The least talented talk about art. The seemliest murmur about earning a living. This is such a useful passage, and it's, besides being funny and beautiful and sort of devastating, but it's really, really useful. If you are a young writer first setting out in public life, I would ask that you engrave it on your hippocampus. Here, and throughout the book to which these lines serve as prelude, Janet Malcolm gets at the troubled nature of consent in journalism, the paradoxes of being trusted by a source, and the fundamentally exploitative nature of reporting. Can't remind yourself of it enough. We are literally taking people and extracting resources from them in the form of stories. But most of all, in this passage and throughout this fascinating book, Malcolm evokes a sense of responsibility that a conscientious reporter must never forsake, even if the reporter can never entirely live up to it. The first steps to infiltrate any secret society are simple. Learn the language make friends, strive to approximate the dress code. Eventually, if you're lucky, you will set them at their ease, even gain their trust. Then you write about them, of course, a betrayal that you hope earnestly they will forgive. She acknowledged it to be very fitting, writes the narrator in Persuasion, that every little social commonwealth should dictate its own matters of discourse, and hoped ere long to become a not unworthy member of the one she was now transplanted into. This is the essential attitude, I think, for reporting on any subculture. You must adapt yourself to the style, the cadence of whatever little commonwealth you happen to find yourself in. In my own case, as I went about infiltrating the Janeites, sometimes wearing a topcoat, cravat, and breeches, other times in civilian clothes, I began to see myself as a hapless visitor in a place that many other people simply called home. A lady once described to me her first impressions on visiting Austen World. Quote, "Finally, a place where one can be oneself." It would be easy to mock this declaration as hollow. The woman speaking it, after all, was dressed at the time in an empire waist gown and a bonnet that might have been an edgy fashion choice in 1808. Hardly a paragon of authenticity in the 21st century. But her statement, as I came to learn, contained a deep truth. For all the affectation, the Regency dialogue and borrowed postures and dance moves of a different continent, a different age, there is somehow among the Janeites a holy frankness to the proceedings, a general sense of camaraderie and enterprise. Let's go mad a bit and argue over who stole the turkeys in Emma. Let's stroll through the quadrangle with parasols and lose ourselves in a better world that never existed. Austen mania is a collective folly, a religion in the sort of latitudinarian Anglican sense that stresses communion over orthodoxy, though I learned it is possible to be excommunicated. Not firsthand, I've just heard about it. Jainism is a shared fiction that we tacitly agree to treat as real, and by coming together, on a good day we can make it real. Now, I think Austen is really the perfect author to create these communities, and when you look at the Janeites through the lens of the novels, you start to see why it all works. If Austen's novels do offer moral lessons about love, they offer just as many reminders of the humble daily moralities of simply being a person among people. Why do readers flock to Austen in this way? Why do they read Austen together? Why, for that matter, did the novel supplant the epic? Well, here's a glib answer. Most of us will never fight a 10 years' war with the Trojans or call upon Athena when things get weird. You can call on Athena. She's not going to do anything for you. On the other hand, you are almost certain to deal with growing apart from a friend, or watching your friend marry someone totally inappropriate, or having to navigate complicated social scenarios at which your family is embarrassing you deeply. The Janeites read Austen because her old-fashioned novels help them see the ironies and small moral struggles of their 21st century lives more clearly. And they read Austen as a group because a central animating drive behind those novels is the delicacy and the utter necessity of socializing as a means to one's own salvation. Now, I didn't see all that at first. At first, I thought these people in their silly clothes were funny, and here's where the ethics thing comes in. I stepped over the line in one magazine piece I wrote about them. Describing the demographics among people who attended a Jane Austen summer camp, I noted a strong contingent of, quote, ladies of a certain age wearing sun visors. Might sound sort of harmless, but my friends, I got a strongly worded email about that line. It came from a woman who appears in my book. Her name is Marie Sprayberry. That's her real name, and she let me use it in the book, which is great because how else are you going to think of any pseudonym anywhere near as good as Sprayberry? In the email, Marie told me that she was very disappointed in me and compared me to John Thorpe. Anyway, yeah, we got some people here. A character in Northanger Abbey who was very rude to the older ladies in Bath. It was such a beautifully written email that it devastated me. I wrote back with profuse apologies for having offended her, and over the next year, whenever Marie spotted me at one or another Jane Austen gathering, she would come over wearing an irascible grin and theatrically place a sun visor on her head. She truly always had it with her, and she would never let me live it down. To this day, I am grateful for Marie's email. It is possible that a woman could have gotten away with that line about ladies of a certain age, but I'm not sure. And anyway, it's not nearly a good enough line to be worth alienating a source over. Young reporters in this room will surely endure far worse over basic daily coverage, and I have also received far worse from sources myself, usually when I was reporting on the police or on the men's rights movement, though I can say that the MRAs do not write emails nearly as well as Marie Sprayberry. And Marie's point stuck with me as I developed those magazine pieces into a book. It served as a reminder that, as a guy reporting on a majority women's space, I had better be careful about avoiding casual ageism and, yes, misogyny. This was not merely a cosmetic point or a question of remaining PC. If I wanted to show the real thing rather than a caricature, I would need to avoid mockery and cheap laughs. So I'd like to think that's what I did. Regardless, I'm certain that showing respect and esteem to the Janeites while reporting on their fascinating community helped me earn their trust and portray them more fully. And that's because I had imagined them more fully. They are a remarkable group to watch. Every generation of Janeites finds new ways to interact with her works, to make these texts meaningful in a new world. Every generation has its improvements, Mariah Bertram says in Mansfield Park while surveying the Rushworth estate. And she's right, they're not in the way that she means. What I admire about the Janeites is the same thing that those young men wearing custard yellow stockings admired about Werther: the capacity to love deeply and gratuitously in an age that values cynicism over earnest sentiment. And now I think we have time for a short excerpt. I'm not good. 7:16? Yeah, you have till 7:30. This is fantastic. Okay. Okay, so this is a very brief episode that illustrates just how cool the Janeites are. And then afterward, I'm available for questions on reporting, publishing, Jane Austen, censorship of the press during the Sturm und Drang period of German history. Just let me know. Okay, so here's an excerpt from the book. When friends and colleagues heard that I was reporting on the eccentric world of Jane Austen superfans, one question was uppermost. Do people hook up at Jane Austen camp? At first I grew irritated at these inquiries, which seemed to assume that Austen cosplay is somehow centrally about sex. It's not really, it's mainly about books, and only a little bit about sex. Still, as I spent more and more time in the world of the Janeites, I came to meet quite a few older couples for whom the Jane Austen summer camp doubled as a romantic getaway, a chance to rediscover the pleasures of flirting with one's spouse. Some, in the tradition of the critics R.W. Chapman and Catherine Metcalfe, had fallen in love with each other in part through discovering a mutual love for Austen. And there are various academic power couples across the world whose unions owe their beginning to an indiscreet moment at an Austen conference. As Rudyard Kipling writes in his 1924 short story called The Janeites, Austen is a bit of a matchmaker, and she remains so even in death. At the larger conferences, I even occasionally met a child, conceived, the parents assured me, with the aid of Austen's prose as aphrodisiac. Most of the couples, though, are mixed marriages, wherein one partner, often but not always a woman, is the true believer and the other partner a willing or sporting participant. On the first evening of the summer camp, I met one such couple, a vivacious pair of 60-somethings, the woman slim and glamorous in her bonnet and evening gown, and the man stout and kindly in an officer's jacket, rarely taking his eyes off his wife, whom he regarded at all times with a smile of mingled deference and infatuation. While we sat together over a late dessert, they explained their routine. The husband had performed theater in his college days, the wife said, distinguishing himself in yellow stockings as Malvolio in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. He had never read a word of Jane, she told me, but the first time I asked him to join me at the Jane Austen ball, he didn't blink. He went to have his costume fitting the very next day. The husband nodded at her and addressed me without looking at me. It is a bit like playing a role, he conceded, sounding almost bashful. And of course we have our games. He means courtship, she translated. The man grinned, as if at his own foolishness, and put down his cake fork. Sometimes we will separate before the ball and observe one another from across the room, he began. His wife, unable to hold back, cut in. And sometimes we dance with other people. The statement had a quality of risque confession, and she raised her eyebrows as though we were discussing a major scandal. The husband giggled. She lends me out, he explained. She won't tell you this, but I think it's because there are often so few men around, and she likes to see the women dancing. Liar, she declared in triumph. He's being very bad. The reason I have him dance with other people is so I can watch him. She squeezed his hand. He's very good. Her mate shook his head. We've been taking lessons for some years, and I can claim only competence. The wife persisted. It is thrilling to watch him charm the others. They looked at each other, and she coaxed him. You can be so charming, and I'm not even sure you know it. That's great. But we always end up together, the man continued, dodging the compliment. After we've spun the room with other people, that is. His wife leaned toward me and spoke in a stage whisper, widening her eyes suggestively. We always pretend that it's the first time we're meeting. That actually sounds really fun, I said. It is. My friends tease me about it. She paused and laughed. They say that we are kinky. That's not what it's about, the man said quickly. That's not why. She now held his hand in both of hers. It's nothing improper, just a little game, a vacation almost. She broke off, and they looked at each other, and it was difficult not to think of Admiral and Mrs. Croft in Jane Austen's Persuasion, one of those older couples whose mutual good humor and evident marital bliss make such an impression on Anne Elliot. Like the Crofts, this couple have no children, and like the Crofts, after many years of marriage, they are still visibly in love. After a long, private pause, for its duration there was no one in the room except for the two of them, the husband turned to me as though awakening and said, It can be a pleasure to meet one's wife as a stranger. The following day, while stealing a quiet moment in the shade of a tree, I spotted the wife in close conference with two other women, one on each of her arms as they traipsed across the quadrangle. En route to a plenary discussion on mothers and daughters in the novels of Austen. The husband followed them at a distance of a few paces, laden with various objets. Under his right arm he carried a clutch of hardbound books, while his wife's reticule, a tiny period handbag, dangled from his wrist. On his left arm was a tote bag with an image of Colin Firth scowling in a frilly collar. And he busied his left hand snapping photos of the three ladies in procession. Occasionally he would stop to request that they turn around to effect a tableau. The ladies smiled and pretended to primp their hair, like Betty Boops of the Regency. Before the quartet exited my field of vision, I saw the husband bounding in pursuit of the three women, yelping a bit and waving the reticule in the air. When he and I bumped into each other the next day, he told me he was worried his wife had forgotten her heart pills. My wife's friends said I made a spectacle of myself, he said, smiling at the figure he had cut. Still, it would hardly have been good manners not to inquire. And that's it.
Awesome. We now have time for questions. Please raise your hand if you have a question. One of us will come to you. Please stand up when you ask your question, and anyone may ask a question, but priority will go to students.
Hi, my name is Andrea. Thank you so much for your talk. I was really interested by what you said a bit earlier in the talk about how learning about subcultures can help us understand like our wider culture and politics, and I was wondering what your experience is reporting on the Jane Austen, like some specific examples of things that you've learned from this reporting or like other subculture reporting that you've like applied to the wider culture.
Great question. Okay, thank you. Is it Andrea, is that right? Yeah. Great, thank you, Andrea. Yeah, okay, so how did I draw political conclusions from my reporting on the Jane Austen Society? So we hear a lot recently, many books are being written, as you know, just this year alone, about the sort of the new energy behind sort of a new tribalism in the United States. And there are a lot of writers who are sort of using the adjective tribal in fairly unfortunate ways. And so I was struck reporting on the Janeites. I was like, well, you know, let's see if tribalism can be a force for good. First, also, let's stop using the word tribalism because I think it's really, really terrible and like deeply obfuscatory and just gets in the way of everything. And I also think the use of that word makes it sound as though like associating with people who agree with you is somehow wrong. And I disagree with that. And so in the Janeite society, you see a sort of horizontally organized microcosm of society. It's not sort of officially structured as a democracy, but its ethic is that of a democracy. It was an instance for me of how you can see like actual like retrenchment into a camp, right? People, the Janeites will talk a lot of smack about the Bronte sisters. It's just going to happen. I was like, well, on the one hand, like, and Amy Chua just brought out this new book about how tribalism is terrible and we should never ever be loyal to our tribes. And I sort of wanted to see, well, like, what are the positive tribes that are going on right now? That is distinct from the political sphere. I don't want to suggest that there should be an Austen vote, or that anyone necessarily should go and try to find that particular voter demographic. But when you look at people in these, the word intentional community comes up more and more as people sort of foresee climate catastrophe, and they're like, well, what are we going to do when the electricity goes out? It's like, well, you can start a homestead with some friends. Intentional community. Looking at a really, really fascinatingly self-regulated spot like the Austen Society, to me, gives you a model for what intentional community looks like. It's not always pretty. People are not always happy. But most of the time, you can make most of the people happy, and that was inspiring to me. And I don't want to talk any more about politics right now. But it's a great question. Thank you.
Hi. Okay. So in our Jane Austen class, we've all created 18th century character personas. And I'm just curious to know who would be a character you would want to be in the novels or not, just in the world in general. Take it away.
From the 18th century in general, or specifically from Austen? I mean, I have to say, which Austen, I mean, he's not a protagonist, right? The men are all secondary. But which Austen sort of like hero would you be? I think the obvious answer is Henry Tilney. And, which is difficult to achieve. You've got to get ordained, you have to be funny, you have to have a younger sister. I have a younger sister. But Tilney is really, really great. We were talking over here at are you the Ath Fellows?
Yeah.
At the head table. We were at the head table. No big deal, just at the head table. We were at the head table, and we were discussing Darcy and whether Matthew Macfadyen or Colin Firth gives us the sort of most accurate or the most organic Darcy. And oh no, we have a dissenter over there. And it was a spirited, very brief discussion. So one person said, well, Colin Firth is better at the aloofness born of pride. Macfadyen is better at the aloofness born of awkwardness. Or something like that, which sounds really cool. What I like about Henry Tilney is that he's able to sort of intercede in the same way that Darcy does, except in a slightly less problematic way than Darcy, to use a terrible word. But he does all that while having an easy manner, the very same easy manner that Darcy says openly, explicitly. He says, I have not that easy way of talking to people. And Tilney has that. He's not nearly as rich, but he's much more entertaining. And he's more achievable, too. Unless you're rich, you're like, well, I can't really make myself into Darcy, and you wouldn't want you to. But you can make yourself into a Henry Tilney, and you do it by being like a good brother and putting people at their ease when you're dancing in the pump room. It's very simple.
Which heroine would you be from the Austen novels?
Emma.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a heartbeat. Yeah. Also, I want to hear more later about everyone's 18th century persona, because that sounds amazing.
This is a really specific question, but why did you say that problematic is a terrible word? I'm just insanely curious.
No, it's a great question, and it's to me it's an imperfect and overused word that to comment on important things. So there are a variety of women readers I know, not even necessarily through a critical lens, but they just read these books and they're like, wait a second, so Darcy went behind Lizzie's back, paid off these people, did X, Y, and Z, and basically stage managed her whole family. That's like, you know, that's a bit much. You know, you could say, oh, it's very aggressively patriarchal, or oh, it's very paternalistic, or whatever. The point is, these are all P words, problematic. But the point is that, like, it's a little bit difficult to deal with in the 21st century. Not that difficult, but it's a thing. Henry Tilney doesn't have anything like that, right? Like, he's not super awkward. He's not sort of conspiring behind Lizzie's back, even to do good things. Is he? Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, but no, I mean, pointing out things that like reify problems or that perpetuate problems is really, really good. I just think we need a broader vocabulary to talk about it. That's all.
Hi, my name is Emma. Thank you for your talk.
Oh, great. Hi, Emma.
I was just wondering how you approach, as a journalist, reporting on subcultures you might fundamentally disagree with while maintaining respect and integrity about your story.
Great. Was that prompted by the men's rights activists?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Great. Okay, so yeah, I mean, you do want to maintaining your integrity. That is important. I have found that it is very, very easy well, it's probably easy to write them, but it's certainly easy to find pieces that are just like, oh, all the MRAs are like disgusting and terrible, and their ideology is toxic. That passes fact check, all true, but like, where does it get you? Not very far. I have spent too much time on the phone with these people, but when you talk to them and when you try to figure out how they were radicalized, if you want to use that term, how they were turned, there's a story there. There's usually a real story. There was one guy who was actually the founder, or at least the head of the National Coalition for Men, which was an outlet that in 2014 took the extraordinary step of publishing headshots, photographs, and personal details, full names of people they deemed to have been false accusers of sexual assault or rape. There were some lawsuits and so forth. It was mainly the North Carolina chapter that was publishing, they're sort of doxing people in this way. Really, really foul. And so I called the national chapter to see what they thought about this. They were against it, largely for reasons of liability, I think, legal liability. But we had a really, really frank discussion. The guy I was talking to, his name is Harry Crouch, not to be confused with, there's a man of letters named Harry Crouch, totally different person. And he was, you know, in the 70s, he was running a suicide hotline for men, and they lost their funding, and that funding went to a suicide hotline for women. And, you know, you could look at that and you could say, oh, this is a story about like a state bureaucracy making decisions about how to spend their money, and oh, look, like the female suicide rate was 5 times the rate of men in the part of Washington that you lived in at the time. I didn't say that to him, I just looked it up. But for him, this was an emblematic moment, and you know, if you talk to him without calling him a patriarch, he's gonna tell you more. He's gonna like get loose and tell you about his first marriage. And like, you know, if you think it wasn't the first marriage that radicalized a lot of those guys, you know. Well, it tends to have been, anyway. So I'm not sure that I wrote a particularly dispassionate piece about Harry Crouch. It was a first-person piece. I quoted extensively from our conversations. I made a couple of jokes. And it was very much not a sort of view from nowhere, neutral, daily newspaper type treatment. But it was also, I think, a fuller portrait of this very unprepossessing man than had been written before, and got a little bit closer toward figuring out what the pathology of this movement is. It wasn't some sort of like super valuable piece, but it wasn't like reporting on the Janeites, because I really had to keep sort of like biting my tongue or like not swearing at him on the telephone, you know, these things. But forbearance is great, and again, if I had approached it just like, I know who this guy is, I know exactly what he stands for, boom, 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 wouldn't have gotten all those weird stories from the 70s and 80s that track totally with what we know, but they also sort of help illustrate how, well, what people refer to as toxic masculinity is sort of hatched. Anyway, is it? Sure.
Thanks so much for your talk there. I write for the student newspaper at the Claremont colleges, The Student Life. and I'm planning on pursuing a career in journalism. So I was just wondering, what advice do you have for people like myself who are interested in the field?
Great. And are you mainly doing like text-based reporting, multimedia? What's your
yeah, like print or radio?
Okay, print, video, and web. Okay.
Yeah, radio.
Yeah, I don't have a ton of life hacks to offer. I can offer like good, solid advice. Write a lot, report a lot, like try to find at least one news story every day. Pitch early and often to places that are not affiliated with your university. Also publish in all the magazines your university has. Try out a bunch of different genres. I would recommend that you keep doing what you're doing in terms of having both a facility in text and also in video. That's going to be great for you. And yeah, don't get lazy. I don't know. It sounds like you're doing the right thing. Oh, write in the mornings too. I'm bullish on this. Write in the mornings. Yeah. Limit your meat consumption too. I think that's really helpful.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I just wanted to hear from you about your experience in balancing between your writing for like your journalist career and writing for like more of your personal stuff. And
Great.
like if it hasn't been a problem for you, how did you manage that?
Oh no, it's been a huge problem for me. So when I was in grad school, it was really great because I was teaching 2, maybe 3 days a week. I had a lot of free time, and I could just drive around and report, and I could just do stories on spec. It was wild. These days, it's much more difficult, and to finish the edits on this book, I guess in like the middle of last year, the final edits, I was just getting up at 5 every day, which is not great. Now that it's done, and I don't have another long nonfiction project that I'm staring down. I might try to report this really long piece about the Great Green Wall of the Sahel. They're trying to like re-green this sort of wonderful band across North Africa. There's a big agricultural story I want to write there. But failing that, I've been working on a little bit of fiction, and it's been mornings, and so far I'm just whiffing really hard. It's not great. The progress is glacial, and the solution is just to keep doing it. Sorry, this craft stuff is so boring. I have no real insights. It's not boring to me. I'm just worried that I'm going to bore you guys. It's really, really hard. I spend so much time editing other people's pieces, and I publish so many pieces every day that it can be hard to get into a mindset where you're like, okay, like not every piece of writing is disposable. Not every piece of writing is like, on a conveyor belt. Some writing can just sit there and marinate a little bit, or cook itself like ceviche. I don't really know. The point is that I've been backsliding a lot. I've had periods where I was like really great, got up early, and I was like, yeah, nailed them. And then right now I'm just in this horrible fallow period. And as I was explaining at the table, I might just, I don't know, give the novel idea to someone else. We'll see. Anyway, I don't mean to depress people.
Hello, my name is Cameron. Thank you for your talk. You touched on this briefly, but I was wondering if you could elaborate on why exactly it is that you think Austen is still so relevant to people who use Snapchat or Instagram, slide into the DMs of people they're interested in. Yeah, so just in the modern age, I think all of us still really identify with her, and yeah.
Right. Because there's a right and a wrong way to do the DM slide, right? And I think that's what it comes down to. I'm not saying that Austen would have been really elegant with her first DM slide she ever did. But the point is that like her books and the people who come so fully to life in those books are the sort of people who want to get that thing right? Or else they're insane caricatures of people who can only do those things incorrectly. I'm actually my favorite DM slide I would love to read is Mrs. Elton in Emma. That would be really fantastic. But it is the ability to have immense fun with manners while also taking them deadly seriously, I think. And so does Austen have like direct wisdom for whether you should make that snap public or not? Probably, yeah. So I think it has to do with manners, it has to do with community, and it has to do with some of the more tangled elements of friendship, which I think, when I feel like some vaguely Austenian voice in my own head being like, actually, it's usually something to do with friends rather than something to do with romance, because I think those relationships, with a couple of exceptions, like persuasion being an exception, those tend to be the relationships that feel realist to me in the books. Very subjective judgment.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering, like, how pure was like the Austen Society? Like, did they like modern interpretations of Austen, like Pride and Prejudice and zombies? Like, did they discuss things like that? And my other question is, did they ever solve who did steal the turkeys at the end of Emma? Like, how did that go?
Oh man, okay.
I want to know.
I'll answer the second one first, just because it's quicker. So there's, did the the people referred to as the gypsies, did they take the turkeys, or was it X, Y, and Z? Was it so and so farmer? My favorite interpretation from a Janeite that I met, I want to say in Minneapolis at one of the big sort of annual general meetings for the Austen Society, is that Emma stole the turkeys. And I was like, that's not canonical, because if she had stolen the turkeys, we would know. Austen doesn't operate, through the iceberg theory of writing fiction. But isn't it just a beautiful thought? I just love that. Wouldn't that make her a little bit more interesting? Again, I would love to be Emma. I'm just saying that would be a cool thing for her to have done. And, oh no, what's the first question? Right.
Modern interpretation
Okay.
of Austen.
Yeah, sorry. So the first question, which I'm answering second, is, was the Jane Austen Society especially purist? Could you come in with the remixes? Could you dress like Cher from Clueless, say? So the answer is it varies. Mileage will vary, but the general rule is to be respectful while also being inclusive. Now the respect goes both ways. Don't dress up in full zombie regalia or vampire regalia or whatever. I've never seen that. But generally, it's not as though they're fighting people away. There are a lot of Austen fans, but there aren't that many people who are like semi-pro Austen fans. And in general, recruiting any group, you want to keep them in. So there are distinct groups within, and sometimes overlapping groups within the Janeites. I will say that I was at one. There's one episode in the book that's recorded where I'm around the table with a bunch of people who are talking about Austen erotica, and they're like, "Oh my God, did you read the Scandal at Pemberley, or did you read Pride/Prejudice, or did you read this other thing?" And this particular table, they were all like, "Ooh, that's icky and gross." But 2 tables away were the people who wrote those books. So the answer is, mixed. But it's a big tent. It's a big tent, and it's a pretty forgiving one. We have time for one more?
We have time if anyone else would like to ask a question.
All right. It appears we've exhausted the question supply. Please, someone raise their hand and correct me if I'm wrong, but please join me in thanking Ted Scheinman.
Thank you, folks, so much for having me.
Oh, by the way, please be sure to check out the Free Food for Thought episode featuring Scheinman. It'll come out very soon.